What? Okay, just step up. Just cover your ears for a second and let the smart people talk.
Okay, I'm down to play that game. Hey, what's going on YouTube? Welcome back to the gray area with your host. It's that kid Greg, and today we are doing a response video to the one janitor. Oh boy. So I'm not going to be responding to that train wreck reasonable questions for anti SJWs or whatever. There have been plenty of people to respond to that video on their own. Check them out. It's not exactly my prerogative to go and talk about that. But I do want to talk about this one video that popped up on the one janitor's channel last week. That is, the gender pay gap is not a myth. Now, I do want it to be known that I actually do like the one janitor. I watch his content frequently. I've been watching his content since he started uploading on YouTube. However, I do not. He's in more recent times. He has become much more pretentious. I want to say the word is like he has this very much "I'm smarter than you" vibe now, which is what I was showcasing with that first clip. And so I feel the need to respond to him in this video. So with that being said, let's roll it.
Hi, I'm T1J. Follow me on Twitter. So sometimes an idea will pop up that defies what we think of as conventional wisdom. Sometimes these are just hoaxes and conspiracy theories or people just saying shit that's not true. Like apparently there are still people that think the earth is flat, and that idea definitely defies conventional wisdom, mainly because it's false. And a lot of times these ideas gain traction, this whole idea of what you've been told is a lie. Like the vast majority of people don't think the earth is flat, and I don't even know how many people do, but I know that it's way too many because if it's any, that's too many. And that's kind of a funny example, but the thing about it is sometimes conventional wisdom is wrong. I don't know how it is in other countries, but those of us who grew up in America, when we were growing up, we were told that saturated fat and cholesterol were terrible for you. You should limit it as much as possible. You're gonna get heart disease, you're gonna die. But what studies are showing now is that saturated fat and cholesterol are not nearly as bad for us as we once thought.
Okay, so you cite this study about saturated fat and cholesterol not necessarily being as bad as we thought. And yes, that is true, but there's also the fact that in order for it to not be bad as it has been thought to be, there has to be also a balance, and there must be exercise going with it. Otherwise, it builds up in the system and leads to medical problems later down the line. Now, this isn't the main point of the video, but since I am doing a response, I figure I might as well do a little bit more than just talking about the main point that I want to get to. But let's move on.
So that kind of thing happens. And because it happens, whenever I hear about these ideas of what you've been told isn't true, I always sort of take note in my head. Even if they end up being confirmed, I think that putting your convictions under scrutiny is still a good exercise. So another example of conventional wisdom being challenged is the idea of the gender pay gap. This notion that women get paid less than men for the same work. And this is an idea that's been advanced by feminists as long as women have been working, I guess. It's one of the most common things they cite as evidence of a patriarchal society that advantages men and disadvantages women. But there's a loud and confident voice of dissent, and this voice has been amplified recently through social media. It has become very common, almost mainstream, to claim that the gender pay gap is a myth. The idea is that once you take into account things like the fact that women tend to have less experience or tend to make different choices than men, then the gender pay gap disappears. And this argument is usually framed around a dispute over the existence of the patriarchy in general. And if it turns out to be true that the gender pay gap is a myth, that would be very unfortunate for feminists. I mean, it wouldn't discredit feminism as a whole, but it would force them to reframe their argument.
Okay, so here's the big point. This is the biggest point leading down to where I will point out his folly. He says that feminism would not lose its merit if the pay gap was disproven, but they would have to reframe their argument. However, you have to look at this in context of modern Western society. Right now in modern Western society, the biggest talking point that feminism has is the gender pay gap. And without the gender pay gap, they really don't have a say in the conversation. Most of the things that you hear feminists talking about, other than the pay gap, as problems are little dumb things like manspreading or this poster is offensive because it tells people that they should be fit, or fucking catcalling with that stupid video of that girl walking around in Harlem wherever and dudes are trying to talk to her. Like, it's stupid things like that that people can sniff out as being bullshit that makes feminism constantly be under scrutiny and under fire. And so the gender pay gap being the only legitimate thing that they can actually talk about, if that turns out to be false, it is a very big thing, and it would essentially take away the voice that feminism has, because without that, you don't have people like the president and people like that girl that played Veronica Mars and Amy Schumer and all these other in-your-face feminists who just so happen to be celebrities. They lose their talking points, and so they look like fools, and thus the movement looks like fools. But continue.
And this kind of thing happens if you're an honest person. Sometimes what happens to be true is unfortunate and doesn't line up with your agenda. For example, if you read and believe the Department of Justice findings on the killing of Michael Brown, then it's really hard to continue the narrative that his death was unjustified. Now, this doesn't change the demonstrable fact that there is racial bias in police interactions, but it forces us to rethink how we frame this conversation. And a lot of people continue to use Michael Brown's case as an example of racially motivated police brutality, either out of ignorance or dishonesty. Or maybe they just think the Department of Justice is lying. But that's the type of thing that we can't do. I think it hurts the movement. We have to have our facts straight. So I wanted to make sure that I had my facts straight about the gender pay gap. So I looked into it. I did some research. I actually made a video about this like maybe a year ago or something. And considering how confidently people say that the gender pay gap is a myth, I was pretty surprised by what I found. Like, not only is the pay gap not a myth, there's so much evidence that it isn't. Like, there's study after study after study that confirms that the wage gap exists. And it's not just the gender pay gap, there's also a racial pay gap. These studies acknowledge that a large portion of the pay gap is due to things like women having less experience, making different choices than men, or being less likely to negotiate their salary or ask for raises. But at the same time, every study also shows that even when you take all of these things into account, there is still an unexplained pay gap left over.
And that is the point of this video, and that is why it's called Semantics. So, in the comment section, I responded to the one janitor because what he says here is very, very important. And I will read you what I wrote verbatim, and I will have it on the screen so you can read it yourself and show you guys. I know you won't reply, but I'll put this here anyway. The reason people say the wage gap is a myth is because the name itself is misleading. Wage implies that women are purposely being paid less on the basis that they are women and nothing else. If you'll notice, a lot of the more honest people who debunk the wage gap or call it a myth will often say something to the effect of, but there is an unexplained earnings gap. The reason this distinction is made and should be made is because earning carries implications of the variables that have to be factored in order to see the real wage gap. While wage implies, as previously mentioned, that the gap is intentionally created by employers, which makes no sense. To which the one janitor responds, I literally have zero interest in a debate about semantics, but this is a serious thing. If we look at the definition of wage, Google gives us a fixed regular payment typically paid on a daily or weekly basis made by an employer to an employee, especially to a manual or unskilled worker. While if we look at the definition for earnings, Google gives us money obtained in return for labor or services. Now look at the difference between these two words. Wage means that the person is being paid a specific amount by an employer, while earning simply means the money that you've made at a certain job or a certain service that you're providing. To say that there is a wage gap means that a gender wage gap, to be specific, that there must be a sense of discrimination and there's a deliberate meaning to the employers paying women less than men. But you say it yourself.
Some people assume that this leftover gap is due to discrimination, and none of these studies can really prove that. That's why they call it an unexplained gap. But the gap exists.
Therefore, it cannot possibly be a wage gap as feminists describe it. And this is serious, because you say that you don't want to debate about semantics, but the way we phrase words and such are very, very important. Look at the Constitution of the United States, which was redrafted multitude of times by the founding fathers to make sure that the wording was clear enough that people understood our rights and that these rights could not be infringed upon through use of legal loopholes within the word. The fact that we have legal loopholes based on the wordings of certain laws should show you how important wages and earnings, that difference is. It should show you how important semantics are. Look at Donald Trump's big fiasco over this weekend with his stupid little grab him by the you-know-what comments. Looking at those words, it is very clear that what he said was not acceptable for a presidential candidate to be saying. But again, the way it was said is also very important. If Trump had simply said, oh yeah, well, I meet lots of women who let me do X, Y, and Z to them because I have money, people might not have had much of a problem with it. But the way he says it, he says,
you can do anything.
Whatever you want.
Grab him by the pussy. You can do anything.
So yes, the way that he words this whole little stupid jock talk is very much it very much says something about his character and about who he is. But if it is worded differently, then you get a totally different conversation, one that isn't called sexual assault by the White House apparently. But again, T1J, I don't dislike you, man. If you ever get to watch this, I don't dislike you. I think you're a cool dude. I like your videos. I don't agree with you all the time, and when I don't agree with you, I make it known in the comments. I don't go and like dislike your videos because I think that's douchey. I think that disagreements can be handled with words and dialogue and all that other good stuff. And you have said it yourself, and I put this in the comments as well. That is okay. It's okay to disagree with somebody. That doesn't make you their enemy. It doesn't make you their antithesis. It just means that you have a disagreement of ideas. And so I guess that's where I'm leaving off on this video. Again, I'm not trying to cause drama. I'm not trying to pick a fight with anybody. You know, I didn't sit here and do a bunch of ad hominems. I didn't call him some early 2000s White Clef. I didn't call him some Dwayne Wade with dreads. Like, I didn't say any of that shit. I just want to open dialogue of ideas. That being said, thank you guys for watching. Thank you guys for listening. And T1J, if you are watching this, I would love for you to do a response or reply or tell me what you think or whatever, man. And remember, nothing is black and white. Fucking Future, Static Shock, Wale with the struggle dreads looking ass nigga.